Well, the story of Bathsheba is not the story of Bathsheba alone. It is also the story of David. They started out on opposite sides, he being the perpetrator, she being the victim. And even though David took her in and she became his wife, the relationship remained fractious. But ultimately, they healed their relationship and rallied around Solomon when the kingdom was being threatened of a coup, and came together to establish their fifth son as David's successor. But make no mistake, it is my belief that Bathsheba instigated the healing of their relationship. She was the one who reached out to get David to own the hurt that he had caused. We'll explore why we suggest that this morning. But even if you don't agree on that point, it is plainly evident that in the matter of establishing Solomon as king, it was she, along with Nathan, her longtime friend and advisor, that instigated a solution to get David out of bed and to act fast, which he did. So it was her courage, her faith in the promises to David that helped to bring a successful answer to the challenges that faced the kingdom. The story of this dark period in David's life and his sin with Bathsheba probably really starts way back to when he was made king over Judah, the first king in the line of Judah, you remember, the princely tribe as was promised by God through the blessings of Jacob upon Judah in Genesis chapter 49. Remember that verse? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet. Now here he was, the first legitimate king in that line. But he was king only over the men of Judah to begin with, and he set up his royal quarters in Hebron. It was during this time that he took wives who bore him sons. Amnon, his firstborn, Absalom, Adonijah, and a daughter too, Tamar. What a name. We've seen that, haven't we, from Monday. But around this time, a little girl was born to one of David's 30 mighty men. Number 21 in the list of 30, actually. They named her Bathsheba, which means daughter of an oath. You see, it was the time of great celebration as they witnessed David, their leader, become David, their king, in accordance with everything that God had promised through Jacob many years ago in that prophecy in Genesis 49, but also through Samuel, where God had made it clear that he had chosen someone better than Saul. And now it had come to pass. And Eliam and his wife rejoiced in this celebratory time by naming their daughter in relation to God's honouring his oath for David to be king. And Eliam had good reason to be privy to many of David's interactions. Not only was he a mighty man of the special group of 30, his own father, Bathsheba's grandfather, Ahithophel, was the special advisor to David, David's closest and dearest friend, who gave consent as if it was an angel speaking, such wisdom, such spirituality, the like not seen in Israel. Bathsheba remembers sitting on her grandfather's lap on many occasions, and he would counsel and advise her when she would ask him her most difficult questions and wonder at the answers he would give. But then about 7 years later, the whole family moved. They were going to the new capital city that David had chosen. Bathsheba learnt that David had just been made king over all Israel and had captured the mighty stronghold of Jebus, which was renamed Jerusalem. This would be her new home. What exciting days they were. So much joy and celebration, especially when the ark came back after being hidden for so long. 80 years, some said. And he was the king, bringing it back. Her king. There was her dad and her granddad in procession behind all the priests. That was a day to remember. Many days were like that. So much happiness. On one occasion, there was a meeting of the 30 men in her father's house. She didn't know what the meeting was about, planning for some battles, it looked like. She wasn't allowed too near. This was men's business, soldiering business. But she well remembers one of the soldiers catching her eye. He smiled at her and she blushed. She found out later that his name was Uriah, also one of David's mighty men, number 30 to be exact. Every time she saw him after that, it made her heart flutter. It was said that he was a Hittite, but what she saw was one who was as much a part of Israel as her own father and grandfather, loyal to David to a T, a faithful soldier and worshipper of the God of Israel. Her grandfather had explained to her how David had a vision to include Gentiles into the hope of Israel. He'd even made a new tabernacle to demonstrate that vision. God wasn't exclusive, he told her. He had created all people, and the promises to Abraham showed how God planned for all kindreds of the earth to be blessed. And so Bathsheba was able to look past the Gentile heritage of this fine soldier and was delighted to accept when one day he asked for her hand in marriage. She was still young, and although he was older, he took good care of her, like as if she was his little ewe lamb. He was thoughtful, kind, and loving, and he doted on her. That first year of marriage was the happiest she had ever experienced, as he'd been allowed to have the year off from his duties. And they spent every moment of that year together, talking about God, talking about the kingdom, about David, their king, and making plans for the future. But he was still a soldier, and before long the winter had passed and spring had come, the time when kings go forth to battle, it was said. And she remembers with fondness that day he kissed her goodbye and went off to war with all of David's mighty men and Joab the captain. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he'd said. Little did she know, but that would be the last time she would ever see her beloved Uriah. For not long after he had gone, she heard a loud banging at her door. She'd only just come inside after washing, and it was getting dark. It was soldiers. They were telling her to get herself ready because David, her king, wanted to meet her. Did he have news about her husband Uriah? "Oh, I hope he hasn't been killed." So off she went with the soldiers to meet her king, not knowing that the events of that night would change her life forever. It was a situation that she was utterly unprepared for. She was still so young. I'm going to suggest between 16 and 20. All she'd ever known was happiness and warmth. Times were good and everybody knew. She had been so trusting. That meant that she was trusting too. They had been trusting in her, and she was trusting too. Some might have put that down to her naivety, others to her immaturity. But that night caused her life to be ripped apart, and things would never be the same again. Now, had Bathsheba known David's state of mind and spiritual standing, she would never have gone up. Now, there are a number of clues that would suggest David is not in a good place at this moment, and he's certainly not the spiritual warrior that Bathsheba had always thought him of. I think there are 5 clues in the record. Here's clue number 1. Look at the deliberate contrast presented in verse 1. So this is 2 Samuel 11 and verse 1 and 2. So it came to pass after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab, his servants with him, and all Israel, and they destroyed the children of Ammon, besieged Rabbah, but David tarried still at Jerusalem. So it's a time when kings go to battle. There's a recognized responsibility of a king to lead his men in battle. David sends Joab, he sends his servants, the idea is the officers, and all Israel. In other words, his entire army. But David stays at home, clearly making a contrast. David has neglected his responsibilities. He's not doing what kings should do. He's relinquished leadership and delegated it out. Clue number 2. It's not because he's engaged in more pressing duties, is it, that he stayed home? He hasn't filled the void with anything positive. Have a look at verse 2. And it came to pass in an eventide that David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house. He got up off his bed after an afternoon's sleep. There's no way he would have been sleeping in the day if he was out there on the battlefield. This is the height of idleness, a life of ease, a mind with no purpose, no goal, just vacant and void. Now it's clear that this is the case from the next phrase. He walked on the roof of the king's house. According to Deuteronomy 22 verse 8, all rooftops were to be made with a battlement on the sides, like a banister rail, to protect people from falling off, it says. But what was the primary reason for going on the rooftop in the first place? Well, that house with its battlement around the four sides was replicating the altar of incense. In Exodus 37, it says that the altar of incense had a crown of gold around its four sides. Incense was a symbol of prayer. Hence, all around Israel, there were models of this altar of incense, and people would go up onto their housetops to pray. Peter, we know, went up to the housetop to pray in Acts chapter 10. Well, David hasn't gone up to pray, you see. He's not been praying for a while. Psalm 32, verse 3, written after Nathan came to the prophet, it says, when I kept silence. That didn't just start after his sin. His relationship with God was already not what it should be. He's not praying to God, you see. Instead, he's looking. Clue number 4. He has a wandering eye. It says, and from the roof, he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. He allows his eyes to linger on the beauty of Bathsheba. He didn't turn away or engage in prayer. He didn't make a covenant with his eyes like Job. He was already committing adultery with her in his heart, as Jesus said in Matthew 5. He has a problem with his eyes. And clue number 5, he persisted even after discovering who she was. You'll see in verse 3, and David sent and inquired after the woman, and one said, is not this Bathsheba the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Just note the utter stupidity and lack of all reason at why having an affair with Bathsheba was insane. Her husband is one of the 30 mighty men. Her father is also, and her grandfather was his close special advisor. You couldn't find any more loyal followers in all Israel than this family. He gave no consideration to how these relationships might suffer as a consequence of this. This is not a momentary lapse of a man at the height of his spiritual acumen, brothers and sisters. This is a man intoxicated with power and ego and arrogance and invincibility, all of which has caused him to lose his moral compass. David has become so estranged from God, even before his sin, that he thought he was untouchable. He's had a long course of uninterrupted prosperity and power, which had intoxicated him and thrown him off his guard. He knows he's Yahweh's anointed. He's been told he's better than Saul. He's captured Jebus. He's brought the ark back to Jerusalem. He's sat in a tent on the right-hand side of the ark. He's had military success after military success, and Rabbah is the very last enclave to conquer. He's like Nebuchadnezzar, King of Kings. He can do no wrong. And that means he can have whatever he chooses. Power has gone to his head. He's no longer a leader of God's people, protecting the lambs as a good shepherd would, but he's lording over them like a lion, seeking the lambs for his selfish gain. This is not Bathsheba flirting with David, as many commentators you might read suggest. This is David unhinged from spirituality. Even a physically merry with drink Uriah was far more focused and in better control of his senses and moral compass than David ever was, even though David was sober at this time. But clearly David was intoxicated with power and lust, which brought momentary loss of purpose and focus and spiritual integrity. Now, this is a stark warning to all of us, brothers and sisters, but I'm going to suggest particularly to us brethren. You all know how much this affects us. And clearly, if it can happen to David, it can happen to any. Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. It's a danger when we are idle in the truth and we lose our sense of purpose or direction. Now, it might be said, well, why didn't Bathsheba stand up to David? Abigail did earlier in his life, and he responded to that. So just a comment on that. David was much younger then. He's on the run from Saul, and he's in charge of only 600 men. He's probably about 25 years old, and Abigail appears older than him. She is also the wife of Nabal, who's a wealthy landowner. She has enormous respect of all the servants and they looked up to her. She is also well experienced at challenging situations of male dominance. She was, after all, married to Nabal. So the fiery, rage-driven lunatic David coming over the hill to kill her arrogant husband did not deter her from attempts to stop him. 2 Samuel 11 is very different. David's now about 45 years old, and he's the king, and he's a powerful king. He's blessed by God. Bathsheba is about 16 to 20. She's called in the parable of Nathan a little ewe lamb, cherished by her husband who calls her daughter. And in the same way that you cannot blame the lamb from getting eaten by the lion, especially when the record is at pains to show that David stole that lamb, that this shows Bathsheba. There's no rebuke from God through Nathan to Bathsheba, only to David. There's nothing in David's own confession. There's nothing in Psalm 51, there's nothing in Psalm 32 that suggests any blame be put on Bathsheba. Oh, but wasn't she washing herself outside in full view? Well, I'm going to suggest that the washing would have taken place at the family well, which was probably in the courtyard of the house. It was late in the evening, we're told. She was catching the last vestiges of sunlight in order to fulfill her obligations of purification. She had no idea that she was being watched, and she would have reasonably assumed that David was not even there. He should have been with those at the battle, with her husband. No, the record apportions no blame to Bathsheba, and therefore neither do I. In fact, the record is presented as showing two wars going on simultaneously. Have a look. 2 Samuel chapter 10, verse 6 to 9. Recounts how David and the army faced the Syrians and the Ammonites the previous year. Remember, Joab split the army into two. He gave half to his brother Abishai and said, "You take on the Ammonites, I'll deal with the Syrians." Well, at the end of the chapter, it tells us that the Syrians got beaten. But there wasn't enough time before winter to deal completely with the Ammonites. That has to stay until next spring. So they waited till spring and they came back in chapter 11, verse 1. But then the story breaks from verse 2 all the way through to chapter 12, verse 25. It's almost like that section's in parentheses. And then in verse 26 of chapter 12, we read, "And Joab fought against Rabbah of the children of Ammon and took the royal city." So it returns to the story of the battle against the Ammonites. So what the record is saying, brothers and sisters, is that there are two battle stories going on. One is against a city, but the other one is against a man's own spirit. As the prophet says, "Better is a man that rules his own spirit than he which takes a city." How more applicable is that proverb to this story than any other proverb? There was Joab and Uriah engaged in a physical battle against God's enemies holed up in a city. And there was David engaged in a spiritual battle against God's greatest enemy, sin, found holed up in his own heart, his own spirit. This should have been the pinnacle of David's reign. From killing Goliath at the age of 17 right through to these 7 military campaigns, they're almost complete, from which would have sprung peace in the kingdom. But this sin, brothers and sisters, this sin caused battles to begin raging in his own family from that point right through to the end of his reign, including 2 rebellions from his own sons. From the age of 17 to the age of 70, David found himself in a constant battle. Solomon had no knowledge of any personal battles himself, did he? Even being made king was not his battle. That was David's last battle at 70 years old. All because he lost this spiritual battle in the height of idleness. There's such powerful lessons for us all there, isn't there, brothers and sisters? To never let our guard down for a moment. Well, we know what happened. Verse 2 says David saw. Verse 3 says David inquired. Verse 4 says David took. Isn't that a repeat of Eve in the Garden of Eden? She saw, she took. A similarity with Achan. He saw, he coveted, he took. In verse 5, come back to chapter 11, Bathsheba finds herself pregnant. How will she be able to explain this to her husband when he returns? She's in exactly the same position that Mary will find herself in our next study, isn't she? Pregnant outside her marriage. But the way Joseph deals with Mary is vastly different to how David seeks to remedy this situation. A pathway that clearly shows how distant he is from God at this time is seen in how the sin just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Have a look at this. Firstly, he lusted on the rooftop. He then committed adultery. He didn't consider the consequences. Relationships were now ruined. He tries to manipulate Uriah to go home to his wife. He gives instructions to murder Uriah in a letter that he makes Uriah carry. So Uriah is carrying his own death warrant. He makes Joab a co-conspirator. He's now in Joab's debt. Joab is a completely godless man, you remember. David allows other men to die in the trap to make the trap look more authentic. That makes men aware. Joab had to tell men to pull back, leaving Uriah stranded. Imagine coming home from that battle, being one of the men that was told to pull back, and then suddenly finding that Uriah's wife is now the king's wife, and you contributed to making sure Uriah died. You know, the law encouraged coming forward and confessing. The penalty was actually significantly lighter if you did. But you see, David is thinking he got away with it. Why own up now? And in so doing, he pronounces his own punishment. I'm jumping ahead. Apologies for that. Just erase that little bit out of your minds for a minute. It's only a paragraph. Look at that list there, brothers and sisters. And you would say, you'd never think it's the same David, would you? Never think it's the same man. Well, we know that 9 months go by. David is quietly thinking he got away with it. He brings Bathsheba into his house and she becomes his wife. But history is always going to remember her as the wife of Uriah. Matthew 1, we've already seen at the beginning of the week, verse 6 says exactly that. Because verse 27 of this chapter tells us that the thing that David had done displeased Yahweh. And so in chapter 12, verse 1, it says that Yahweh sent Nathan unto David. Now, you might have noticed, some of you may have coloured this in, that there's a lot of sending that went on in chapter 11. All right, I'll just tell them to you. I haven't got on a slide. It started with David sending to inquire about Bathsheba in verse 3. Verse 4, he sent messengers to her. Then he sent to Joab in verse 6. Then he sent a letter by the hand of Uriah. Then in verse 18, Joab sent back. And then in verse 27, David sent to fetch Bathsheba. Sending back and forth, sent. And all this time, God's watching this sending back and forth. And now in chapter 12, verse 1, Yahweh sent Nathan. He intervenes with his sending to outline a parable to him. And we know the parable. We don't need to read the parable. I think David probably thought that this was a judicial matter that David had brought to him, but had covered up the name so that David could give an unbiased answer. Not knowing how true that was, David pronounces his own judgment in a fit of anger. Verse 5, he says, David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, and he said to Nathan, as Yahweh liveth, the man that hath done this shall surely die. And in verse 6, he shall restore fourfold because he has done this. Now, under the law, a stolen sheep was to be restored with 4 more if a man got found out. If it was a cow, it was to be 5 cows. So David knew the law, didn't he? He understood the law. Exodus 22. Of course, if he had owned up and confessed, the law said that if you confessed before you were found out, you only had to give back 1/5. So, and that was probably worked out in monetary terms. You didn't give back just the leg of the lamb, all right? You would have worked out some how many shekels that was worth. But it's a significantly lower, isn't it, penalty if you owned up and confessed. Only 1/5 as opposed to 4 lambs. That's under the trespass offering. So the law encouraged coming forward and confessing. So you've heard this bit before. The penalty was significantly light. Oh, I'm doing the same thing with that word again. Significantly lighter if you did. But David is thinking he got away with it. Why own up now? And in so doing, he has just pronounced his own judgment. If he had confessed, the penalty would have been lighter, but he didn't. And now the sword, we're told, would never leave his house. In verse 10, now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. This sword never leaving his house was going to include this newborn son. You imagine having to tell this new young wife whom he had stolen that Yahweh was indeed so unhappy with him, he'd been found out, but because he confessed, he won't die, but the child will. Have a look at verse 13. And David said to Nathan, I have sinned against Yahweh. And Nathan said unto Yahweh, Yahweh also hath put away thy sin. Thou shalt not die. Draw a line over to verse 5. David said, thou shalt surely die. Yahweh says, thou shalt not die. You have been forgiven. But then in verse 14, howbeit, because by this deed there has been great occasion to the enemies of Yahweh to blaspheme, the child that is born unto thee shall die. And it wasn't because the child was born sick. It's because Yahweh made the child sick. Yahweh killed the child. Her first child was to die. Think of Bathsheba. It was never meant to be like this. Little did she know at this stage, her last child was going to be king. Oh boy, Bathsheba's going to go through a lot of emotional turmoil, isn't she? The young Bathsheba. She loses her first child and she's also lost her first husband. Her child was taken by Yahweh. And her husband, she was to discover later, was taken by her adulterous king. Seems so unfair, doesn't it? The guilty David lives and the innocent child dies. Sounds a bit like substitution, doesn't it? The child died instead of David. And then we have in verse 24 of chapter 12, the birth of Solomon. His name means beloved. His name means peaceable, but he's nicknamed beloved. Now, I'm not going to spend any time on this, brothers and sisters, but if you're wondering what's going on in this story, there is a parable going on here between these two babies. And I think it might help just explain what's going on. The child that dies is a representative of David. The child's unnamed, it's uncircumcised, it doesn't even reach the 8th day when you get circumcised. It's influenced by the seed of Nahash. He was the king of Rabbah, Ammon, okay? And we're specifically told that he's the son of Nahash. And in taking that city, it could have been said that Nahash influenced the death of Uriah, hence helping the throne with David and this young boy. So it's born in sin. It's born in sin and conceived in iniquity. That's exactly what David says in Psalm 51. I have been born in sin and conceived in iniquity. He's referring to that child, isn't he? This child is full of David's humanity. I will go to him, he will not come to me. And then we have a switch. We have a child that Yahweh loves. We have a child that God nickname's beloved of me. He's the result of an oath, we're going to find out in a moment. He was born to fulfill the promise of king. He's full of the wisdom of God. What you have here, brothers and sisters, is two halves of the atonement. David is being shown how forgiveness works. And of course, we know that the atonement shows how forgiveness works. This is the two halves of the work of the Lord Jesus Christ being displayed here. A representative of us and a representative of God. But in verse 24, we have this unusual thing here. There's a very strange comment. Verse 23, the child is dead, so David gets up, but now he is dead. Wherefore shall I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. The child's died, so David's up and he's back to his duties. And then it says, and David comforted Bathsheba his wife and went in unto her and lay with her. I think the comfort David provides incorporates something that's not actually mentioned here, but is later on in the story. He comforts her by making an oath to her. It's very intriguing, and I think a wonderful theme of reconciliation emerges from the story by putting some verses together. So let me show you. I hope I don't lose any of you in the train of thought. So here's my suggestion. This relationship between David and Bathsheba never started off well, did it? I think we can agree on that. But my suggestion is that for a long time afterward, it never got any better. David might have been forgiven by God, but he still got quite a lot to do to make it up to Bathsheba, which he ultimately did by making her a promise. Why do we suggest this relationship was fractious? Well, because verse 24 might appear to show Solomon as the next son of Bathsheba after the dead son, but a comparison between some other passages in 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles show that there are actually 3 sons born between the firstborn that died and Solomon. Solomon's the 5th son of Bathsheba. So, have a look at this. 2 Samuel chapter 3. Verse 2 to 5, and unto David were sons born in Hebron, his firstborn Ammon. Verse 3, his secondborn Chileab, thirdborn Absalom, fourthborn Adonijah, and so on. All right? They were all born in Hebron. But then come to chapter 5. Chapter 5, verse 13. When David gets to Hebron, he takes more wives. He gets to Jerusalem, I should say, from Hebron. He's taken Jebus. He's made it the capital. And in verse 13 of chapter 5, David took him more concubines and wives out of Jerusalem after he had come from Hebron, and there were born yet more sons and daughters. And these be the names of those that were born unto him in Jerusalem: Shammua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, and so on. Now, you're not told here who the mothers were, but now come across to 1 Chronicles chapter 3. First Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1 to 4, it repeats the sons born to him in Hebron. The firstborn Ammon, verse 1, the secondborn, the thirdborn, verse 2, and the fourthborn, Adonijah, at the end of verse 2. Verse 4, these 6 were born unto him in Hebron, and there he reigned 7 years and 6 months. And in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years, and these were born unto him in Jerusalem. Have a look. Shimea, Shobab, Nathan, and Solomon. They're the same 4 we mentioned, we read in Samuel, but now look who the mother is. Of Bathsheba, you see the margin? Bathsheba, the daughter of Amiel, Eliab. Chronicles have just changed the the names a little bit. Same people. Now note the order. It's the same as 2 Samuel. Some say that the chronicler has put Samuel last because he's going to go on and talk about him next, and he really is the second born. But no, it's the same order as Samuel. So the first son died, and you can imagine the tension in their relationship, brothers and sisters. Yes, he's the king. Yes, he's brought her into his house, his palace, where he could have cast her off. He could have, couldn't he? He could have just shunted her off somewhere else. But how awkward and challenging was this relationship now? But you see, it's going to be Bathsheba who eventually was able to move David to heal this relationship with an oath. How? Well, think about this. Remember how Leah named her first 4 sons all based around her relationship with Jacob? How it was going, how it was ticking along? All right? I suggest that's exactly what's happening here. There are 3 sons born before Solomon, which tell a similar story. Bathsheba names these sons based on where she's at with David, because these are odd names to give your children if you accept them on face value. Oh, I forgot to put the other half of that up. So, quick photograph of that if anyone wants. Take the first son, Shammua, or Shimei, as it is in Chronicles. His name means a report, a hearing, a rumour. Why would you name your son that? Had Bathsheba heard the reports from the returning soldiers, the rumours about how Uriah died? I've heard the reports. Are they true, David? Yes, dear, they are true. Don't you dear me. The second son is named Shobab. That means rebellious. You're as rotten to the core, David, as anyone I've ever met. How could you have done all that? Why did you? He was my husband. Can you feel that she's feeling lonely and lost? So she names her third son Nathan. His name means gift, yes, but I'm going to suggest she's clearly naming him after the prophet Nathan. Why? Well, because of how much support she had got from that man. He took her under his wing, helped her find her way around the royal court. She was ever so grateful to him. And David learns about this and asks why she had named him Nathan. She tells him, she pours out her heart. She carefully takes David through all the trauma, all the pain, all the hurt and loss, how she misses her first child, how she misses her first husband, how she feels lost, lonely, out of place in a king's house. She doesn't belong here. She never wanted this. This is all above her station. She was content just to be the little ewe lamb, but it was all ripped away from her. I know you're the king, and you're a good king, really. I want you to succeed, but actually all along it's been Nathan that's been keeping me going, giving me strength. That's why I've called him Nathan. Now you imagine David hearing this, brothers and sisters. His heart would have melted, wouldn't it? His face would have dropped with sadness. He'd feel wretched and pained that the effects of his sin had run so deep. This beautiful, wholesome, spiritual woman didn't deserve any of this. And she's right. I can't be with her all the time. I haven't been her biggest support. She has every right to call this child Nathan. But there was something he could do, because he had actually been told the name of his successor by God, but the child was not born yet. So he told Bathsheba that he would give her life purpose. He would give it meaning by elevating her to Queen Mother, because he would make her a promise, an oath sworn in Yahweh's name, that her next son would be named Solomon. This, I'm going to suggest, is how he comforted her. And that's why the verse goes on to say, he went and lay with her to provide that son. So let's put some verses together. I'm going to just go through slowly on the screen and just each point come up and try and build the story for you. So 2 Samuel 12, we were told that David comforted his wife. How? By making an oath to her. What oath? Come to 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 1 is the incident of Adonijah's rebellion, and the throne is under threat. And Bathsheba and Nathan come rushing into the king. Nathan orchestrates it. And Bathsheba and Nathan orchestrate this, and they go into the king. And she says in verse 13, Nathan says to Bathsheba, "Go in and get thee unto the king David, and say unto him, Didst not thou, my lord, O king, swear unto thine handmaid, saying, Assuredly Solomon thy son shall reign after me, and he shall sit upon my throne? Why then doth Adonijah?" Go and tell him about this oath. So she does in verse 17. She comes in, and she said unto the king, "My lord, thou swearest by Yahweh thy God unto thine handmaid, saying, Assuredly Solomon thy son shall reign after me. You made an oath to me. You promised me it would be Solomon." And then in verse 30, David gets off his bed and he says, "Yes, I did make you an oath. Even as I swear unto thee by Yahweh God of Israel, saying, Assuredly Solomon thy son shall reign after me, and he shall sit upon my throne. I will do it because I made a promise." The oath he made was that Solomon would sit on his throne. So how did he know that the next king would be called Solomon? How did he know that? Well, come to 1 Chronicles 22. God had told him that Solomon would be the name of the next king. 1 Chronicles 22. When did God tell him this? Well, we're told something here in 1 Chronicles 22 when David's talking to Solomon as he's about to hand over the throne. In verse 6, he called for Solomon, his son, and charged him to build a house. And in verse 7, he says to Solomon, "My son, as for me, it was in my mind to build an house unto the name of Yahweh my God." Where's that from? That's 2 Samuel 7, isn't it? So he's taking you back to 2 Samuel chapter 7. "Came to me saying, Thou hast shed blood abundantly. Thou hast made great wars. Thou shalt not build an house unto my name, because thou hast shed much blood upon the earth in my sight. Behold, a son shall be born to thee, who shall be a man of rest. And I will give him rest from all his enemies round about. For his name shall be Solomon." Now, you don't read that in 2 Samuel 7, do you? You don't know that the name of the child is revealed in 2 Samuel 7. It takes many years later for David to tell us that. But on that occasion in 2 Samuel 7, God made a promise, and he even told David the name of the king that would succeed him, the name of the son. He will be called Solomon. But Solomon's not born yet. So who named him Solomon? 2 Samuel 12, verse 24, it says that he comforted his wife and lay with her, and she conceived and bare a son, and he called his name Solomon. I make a promise. It's within my power to name whatever child I desire Solomon. I make a promise. Here's my comfort for you, my love. I promise your next son will be called Solomon. That will guarantee him to be the next king. Isn't that amazing? It's just incredible. Putting all that together, God left it to David to choose which son would be called Solomon. And so Solomon was born, and it says Yahweh loved him. Yahweh endorsed this relationship because it had healed. And so Yahweh sent immediately to express his endorsement by sending Nathan. Who else to send? To say, Yahweh loves this boy. And Nathan gives it the nickname Jedediah, beloved of Yahweh. It's remarkable, isn't it? It shows Bathsheba's diligence in wanting to heal this relationship. And for that, brothers and sisters, she actually finds 2 of her sons lead to Christ. It's astonishing. Through Nathan, you're led to Mary, and through Solomon, you're led to Joseph. 2 sons are in the line. But notice that the one with the bloodline direct to Mary came through Nathan, not Solomon. God chose Nathan's line to be the natural line, the one who Bathsheba named. What an incredible woman, put through challenges none of us would ever want to face, but she did with courage, faith, love, and forgiveness, as well as determination. And that's why there are actually 2 lines from her direct to Christ, the one through Nathan in Luke's Gospel, and the other one where Matthew names her as the one who had been the wife of Uriah, and where she is found in the lineage of Messiah the King.